Good day, everyone. My name is Melba Crawford, and I'm from Purdue University. My colleague Ed Delp and I are pleased to be able to share our ideas on the challenges and opportunities in plant phenotyping. The title of our talk is Multi-modality remote sensing in high-throughput phenotyping, and we're focusing on the opportunities for machine learning. For those of you who are not from an ag background, plant breeding focuses on first producing the candidate genotypes and then selecting the best genotypes. This is done based on phenotypes, which are the measurable characteristics or traits of a plant. Now, they're the result of the genotype, the environment, and the management practices to which the plants have been subjected. Traditionally, phenotypes are measured directly and often involve destructive sampling. It's expensive, time-consuming, and is the current bottleneck in phenotyping. As an example, phenotyping sorghum as an energy crop, what you would see on the left are agronomic traits that might be of interest. And on the right, some of the opportunities for advanced sensing and model-based phenotyping for which we can leverage machine learning. Now, phenotyping occurs on all kinds of platforms and with multiple types of sensors. It includes controlled facilities, wheeled vehicles, large and small, airborne platforms, and even spaceborne platforms. All of them produce data of one sort or another, and much of the data is RGB, spectral data, thermal data, or LiDAR.
Relative to indoor phenotyping, there are unique opportunities as well as challenges. These facilities are controlled, so the experiments are repeatable. The data are typically very high spatial resolution, and the platforms are very well characterized. However, the environment just cannot emulate the natural conditions of the outdoors. They're also expensive to operate, and sample sizes are typically quite limited. In the example on the left, you have a study of maize during flowering. Spectral signatures have been acquired over 4 dates by a hyperspectral camera. So dimensionality will be required, either some form of feature selection or extraction, followed by analysis, in this case, a classification. In these facilities, machine learning typically focuses on classical approaches for classification and prediction. They provide great opportunities to develop algorithms and models and understand the biology prior to going to the field. In field-based phenotyping, plants are shown in plots within fields. And you see examples of 4 different experiments indicated by the yellow boxes. The plots are planted according to an experimental design. You see an example on the right for 18 different varieties of sorghum. Now, these are natural environments, but they're operationally constrained. The extensive processing is required for data, typically acquired by remotely sensed platforms. But the limiting factor is really the limited reference data that's required for actually developing data analytics-driven models. So there are many opportunities for development of both classical and advanced machine learning models that will mitigate the impact of this limited data, as well as exploit the opportunities associated with the spatial and spectral patterns. One of the first things that's required during the season is to extract plots, all right, for subsequent analysis during the season. So what you see here are 3 different plots, each with 4 rows, that have been extracted using a machine learning based algorithm. Now, this requires very good positioning, and so system calibration is necessary, as indicated by the graphic in the center, to achieve this. And the result is going to be well-aligned data for multi-temporal analysis, as is shown by this seasonal study of sorghum over multiple dates. RGB imagery are also used for plant counting and location. And we and many others over the recent years have used convolutional neural networks to actually achieve this. In our case, we study the location and then estimate the count. In this case, it's achieved by a Gaussian mixture model. And you see the results associated with the variability, both in number and distribution of the plants. As we've progressed, then we have also been interested in robust algorithms which have more generalization characteristics. So in this example, CenterNet, which is an anchor-free detector with key point estimation, is used in conjunction with transfer learning. So we have on the right two fields, one's called acre and the other is Wabash. The algorithm is trained on acre and applied to Wabash. The graphic below qualitatively shows the impact of training on acre and then blindly applying it to predict on Wabash. And the bottom image shows the impact of actually updating via few-shot learning. The results are also shown more clearly in the table on the left, where you see not only the results associated with CenterNet, where the blind transfer learning has been applied and few-shot learning has been applied, but also a commonly used approach based on the RetinaNet model. And you can see in this particular case, both the impact of CenterNet and the few-shot learning.
Now, for more complex architectures, for looking at other kinds of structures, UNet is a possibility. And so we are using that as well with a similar updating strategy. And a paper is going to be presented later in this workshop, and it'll be paper 16 where more details will be shown. Other kinds of characteristics through the season that you might be interested in are associated with individual leaves, the characteristics in terms of the area, the length, the width, and the number, which could be a surrogate for leaf area index. So you see here a couple of strategies. What comes to mind typically initially are some classical approaches. We call this sequence of operations the edge influence zone approach, and it's compared to, on the bottom, mask RNN. Each has value in terms of various metrics, and this work is ongoing. As you progress through the season, for sorghum, you're interested in panicles, for maize, tassels associated with flowering. Our colleagues at IBM worked on panicle counting using CNN, and included thermal time as a unique kind of a contribution. Thermal time in terms of the growing degree days, so it's temperature and time since planting. In addition, then they leveraged the data using traditional augmentation approaches to the label data. And then when they found that analyzing individual images sometimes produced later dates with fewer panicles, then they incorporated isotonic regression in order to solve that problem. And they got very good R-squared values, as you can see below. Now, RGB data is widely used, but it's not the best in terms of plant structure and height. So LiDAR, which can be flown on UAVs or can operate on wheeled vehicles, is the typical sensor of choice. What you see in the series below is a sequence of images of the plots throughout the season, where you see not only the growth, and it's variable with the various varieties, but you also see the impact of sampling as you see those holes that progress throughout the season. Now, as we go to predicting more complex phenotypes, then we have even additional challenges. The relationships with these complex phenotypes are often nonlinear. They're also dynamic. So the features that might be useful in some part of the season are not the same as the features at a later part of the growing season. The problem with the reference samples gets only larger. And you can see on the right, there's quite a bit of variability between and within varieties. So trying to develop a comprehensive model that would be suitable for all is a difficult thing to do. Now, the ways that this can be done are threefold, essentially. Now, traditionally, you have your plants, you do your harvest, and you measure your biomass. So that would be the series in the first figure on the right. And then in the middle, we have the remote sensing data, from which we'll derive and develop data analytics-based models, and we would predict biomass. The third sequence on the right is associated with biophysical crop models, which are used as simulation. So the remote sensing data can be used to help tune those models, but those models in turn can help mitigate the problem with labeled data, potentially. And potentially they could be integrated with feedback loops. So that would be, I would say, the holy grail. So in building these kind of complex phenotype models. Then the kinds of inputs would include genetics, and what you see here is 80,000 genetic markers, which of course have to be reduced in some way. Principal components, wavelets, etc. are commonly used. RGB image base features, which we've discussed, that would be collected throughout the season. Hyperspectral features, which are hundreds of them in terms of the individual data points, and LiDAR features. Weather needs to be included, as I indicated. The most common way to do that is precipitation, thermal data through growing degree days, and radiation data could be included as well. Now, starting with the model building, then, building a model for 1 year is not adequate because it only represents 1 year of data in terms of the weather and other conditions. So this shows you the results of 2 years of data for training, which is still very limited, on 2 different characteristics. So what we'll see is 2 different experiments, the SBDiv test cross cal and the SBDiv test cross data on the indicated on the left and the right, and the biomass is predicted and the rank is predicted. And these are using traditional kinds of methods, using inputs that I had indicated on the previous slide. Now, as we move forward, then we've also been looking at autoencoders for feature learning. Traditional fully connected neural networks and 1D convolutional neural networks do a very good job in terms of reconstruction and dramatically reduce the number of features, typically to 4 to 5. You can also explore the use of 2D encoders. And so looking here, what we have is this 2D encoder that is going to be developed for the SBDiv test cross in 2018, and then that network is directly, those features are directly applied into these other experiments. The next step would be to try to incorporate some sort of transfer learning to actually update it and improve the solution. These can be, as I might note, both supervised and unsupervised in terms of the encoding. Now, taking this to the next step where you're actually doing the prediction, then this is a time series, so recursive neural network architectures are very possible to use. This shows a simple example, which is using weather, LiDAR, and hyperspectral data as inputs. Now, the way this architecture is designed, then they all have to be synchronized. So if you didn't have data at the same time or the same quantities of acquisitions, then you could separate it out, something like this. And so we refer to the first architecture as LSTM and the second as GRU. And what you'll see here on the right are the predictions from those, which are getting to be reasonable. Now, these are 1-year predictions using all the data throughout that year. So you see the figures on the left are 2017, the middle is 2018, and the right is 2019. Now, the problem with 2019, which looks worse, is that there was much less reference data. And so you see the impact of that. Regardless of how elegant your model, then you have to have good data. So finally, as I mentioned, the last strategy is to incorporate biophysical models, and there are many, many opportunities for doing that. These are complex, and they have many interactions, but again, this is a great opportunity to move forward. And as we look forward, then the kind of things that we see that are great opportunities are, again, to deal with this limited reference sample issue. And even when you're collecting labeled data from imagery, then there are annotation issues. You can incorporate some other strategies like GANs to actually increase the data artificially. We're also looking at data where we use priors from Bayesian networks. Instead of just having the encoding being separate and input to an architecture, then it's possible to investigate end-to-end learning as a more natural strategy. Many opportunities for looking at domain adaptation and efficient transfer learning for more difficult problems. And finally, looking at multi-scale problems where we're dealing with very high resolution data here, but you want to expand the coverage, and you might have remotely sensed data at lower resolutions from other platforms. And then finally, as I noted, you want to integrate all of this. So these are our references if you're interested. And I'd just like to acknowledge that most of the work here was funded in part by an ARPA-E project from the Department of Energy, and it's known as the Terra Project.